So, hello everybody. This is Martin Jan Stránský coming to you from Prague, and I have the great pleasure of talking to Professor Ari Lightman today, who's a distinguished service professor at Carnegie Mellon. And both of us are, in some way, shape, or form, interested in human behavior, the human brain, and in intelligence. And Ari has a what seems to be a really great book coming out, if I understand it correctly, in October with a title that's really grabbed me called Monster Transformation: Conquer Your Digital Fears, Be AI Ready, and Focus on What Matters to Your Organization. But right under that, in his website or on his LinkedIn, I see an internet publication: Gen Z has never known a world without data sharing, and it shows. And in my recent book, The Rise and Fall of the Human Mind, one of the things I do focus on is basically to be rather dramatic about the progressive decline in evolutionarily derived thinking and thinking patterns. No more is this apparent than in Gen Z. Ari, how does your book and that second title sort of link into what what I started to talk about?
Sure, Martin. Thanks for having me. So my book is really around the central premise of why do organizations fail to meet expectations when it comes to transformational effort, right? We all know transformation is really tough, really challenging. There's a lot of intertwined parts. But the premise is basically the idea that you really have to understand the competency of your employees and elevate them to really tackle some of the big barriers or hurdles when it comes to organizational transformation. And anybody who works in an organization knows these. They can sort of rattle them off their tongue. There's structural complexity, there's process complexity, there's perverse incentive patterns, there's silos. These sorts of things all have to be addressed if we're ever going to be able to sufficiently transform the organization. One of the ways that it sort of dovetails into Gen Z, so I do a lot of research on Gen Z. I have a class at CMU called Measuring Social, where we bring in 14 different brands. They're the biggest Fortune 1000 type companies that you can imagine. And we ask them a little bit about how we could assess social data and understand online communities to help them achieve strategic initiatives. So it might be somebody like, L'Oreal looking at makeup influencers. It could be somebody like NVIDIA trying to understand, general intelligence and the market for agentic AI in manufacturing. All right? And what does online data say about that? But I think, Martin, the way that the two intersect is we have to understand a little bit about how the next generation of employee is wired, what provides them value, how they work efficiently and sufficiently, right? What they're looking out of a career and a sort of employment engagement experience, those sorts of things. And we do the same thing in my class by looking at sort of online patterns. But our method and our methodology and our thought process is really around the idea of organizational transformation needs to understand the next generation of worker and how to elevate them. Otherwise, they're going to get frustrated and leave, and organizations will never transform sufficiently.
So my question on that is, in fact, there was an article on the front page of the New York Times today, International Edition, showing how young people in Gen Z are proven to be less and less happy, in many ways less and less employable. There was a recent article a couple of months ago in the Wall Street Journal where they interviewed HR managers, and most of them said that they don't give interviews to many Gen Z people because they don't last. So my question to you is it sounds like you said a really neat thing that what's going to elevate them or what's going to make them more employable. But shouldn't we be starting, as a physician, I'm asking the question, with the root of the problem? Don't we need to go back rather than accept the fact that we're taking somebody who is, according to the studies, being clearly negatively influenced by technology as far as social media use and digital screen use is concerned and start from there rather than accept the premise that this is what we have and we need to make it better sort of post facto? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, Martin. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Once again, I do think there are tremendous negative repercussions associated with our digitized lives, and especially on um, the challenge associated with mental health, brain development within the Gen Z population, and now with Gen Alpha, which is coming up behind them, or after them, if you will. I think one of the things that I have an issue with is us not meeting them where they are, right? We're trying to elevate sort of Gen Z to meet our standards associated. You and I are of probably the same generation. And so let's take an
Unfortunately, I'm
example.
a bit older, but that's okay.
You look great.
Yeah.
So let's say, when you and I were in university, right? When we were going through our studies, a lot of our classes were rote-based education. And you probably know what I mean. It's memorization, right? Memorization to understand competency. And it's a pressure cooker, right? All my master's degrees, and I'm sure, your medical education, all that sort of things were stress factories, right? And it weeded out sort of, the wheat from the chaff, those sorts of things. But also this idea of understanding student behavior. And that was the course of education. Now, with disruption in education and the next generation of learner, we're identifying something different associated with how people learn. There's active learning, there's participatory learning, and the mechanism, the way that I teach, has gone away from rote and theoretical to applied. Let's roll up our sleeves, let's get to work, let's figure things out. So the reason why I mention that to you, Martin, is if we use the same HR practices, the same mechanism that work was delivered, without rethinking, work 2.0, working 2.0, workplace 2.0, then we're not really meeting them where they are. And we saw this during COVID, right? Teaching during COVID sucked. It was terrible experience. I was the one that raised my hand, so I would go into campus and I would teach to 2 or 3 students in a classroom, all masked up, with another 40 folks online on a Zoom session, right? The modes of behavior, the norms of interaction were different from a classroom. We're all together and I'm seeing everybody in their expression. We're all interacting versus teaching on Zoom, right?
Sure.
It's the same thing with work. If you take work in a physical setting and just move it to a digital setting without rethinking it, it doesn't work effectively. We saw some increases in productivity because people didn't have to commute into work, but then we saw decreases because work didn't fundamentally change to meet the online environment. So right now, there's a bunch of people who are talking about what might work look like in the metaverse. Well, if you take it from a digital setting to a virtual reality setting, it's going to be fundamentally different. So we have to rethink work. We have to rethink structures, given all these inflection points that might be happening within society. And one of those inflection points is the next generation of work.
Right. Well, I'm going to go back to my question. I completely understand what you're saying, but from my point of view, it's almost a neurophilosophical question. With standardized test score results falling steadily over the last 10 to 15 years, with surveys showing that Gen Z and the younger generation have consistently lowering so-called fluid intelligence, creative thinking, and problem solving, and with more and more people over the last 10 or 15 years teaching the way you said that teaching should be, that is less and less rote. My question is, and I apologize for the sort of almost rudeness of the question, are these people who we want to readdress and look at our work environment and our productivity, are they capable at all of doing anything that's productive? And if so, what? And if so, has it already been done or is it being tried? And where's the study that shows that these people are capable of working in an environment that requires interpersonal relation skills, that requires stepping into an organization that's already up and running and adapting to the rules of that organization? I understand that they're creative. I understand that they have many positive traits, such as an emphasis on uh, personal choice and on lifestyle, for instance, like that. But the world is still a place with rules. And a lot of those rules are associated with problems. And this generation has been shown to have great difficulty in dealing with problems because they simply can't press that delete button. They have to talk to a real person. So let's say that everything that you've said is going to start to evolve and come true. My question is how? What are the sort of almost medical neurological steps, or the thinking steps, or the system steps that we need to do to prove to ourselves and to these people that they can be productive in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from.
I'm trying to be a little devilish,
yeah, I know it's fantastic, and you make a wonderful point. I think my point is the assessment criteria and the tests that you mentioned, the structuredized tests associated with understanding fluid intelligence, need to change. Those are based on I think what we do, unfortunately, is we impose rigid structures that are based on our historical preference.
Okay.
Becoming agile and adaptive means we need to rethink things continuously.
All right.
What does it mean to be communicative? What does it mean to have interpersonal relationships? Right? We can't base it on a standard that you and I might have in our collective consciousness associated with our mental model.
Okay. So what standard, or how do we change? Because you're basically talking about changing things at one end to accommodate the other end, and perhaps helping the other end meet the first end. Here in the Czech Republic, where I am at the moment, we have, just as in other countries, entry-level standardized tests to different levels of education. And one of them is kind of a big test that students need to take to get into college in general, kind of like the equivalent of the SATs. What we found here, and not just in this country, is that the pass rate for the test has gone down and down and down and down, so that the country has come to the point where there are now not enough students passing the test to get into the university slots. So what did they do? They lowered the pass rate. Sounds to me like you're lowering the pass rate. So we're getting dumber, students into university, so that we have, quote, enough students with university degrees to fill the jobs that, quote, require university degrees.
I'm not saying that, Martin. I think maybe we need to rethink this gated mechanism for your students to get into college, as well as rethink how education is delivered. I think, look, I don't want to lower the bar to get into college by no means, but I think these sort of check mechanisms that we have in place that, once again, I'm not really quite sure about the check bag, but I know that SAT has been standardized since I tried to get into college. I mean, maybe we need to rethink what it means to have intelligence. Maybe we need to rethink listen, I don't know what the educational system might be like in the Czech Republic and in the EU. Here in the US, it's abysmal. It's horrible. And what's happening right now with the administration and their sort of view on education, it's not going to get any better quicker. But we need to fundamentally think about how teachers connect, have emotional intelligence associated with the students, which they do to a large extent, but understand what it means associated with providing quality education that is durable, right?
So let's say you're the Secretary of Education or the whatever in the United States. Can you suggest any concrete, specific steps or changes, concrete changes in approach that you would like to see happen, besides abandonment of rote memory and perhaps even standardized testing, and how that would benefit the sort of market? If you had your wish and if it came true, what would that look like?
A good question. Wow, I never usually get what I want before.
Now you do.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to become a little bit more individualized and customized to that particular type of learner. And perhaps this might be where AI comes in, right? AI has the ability to customize and assess for a large audience, right? Based on individual learning style, right? So combination of written assessment plus oral assessment plus project-based assessment, right? Those sorts of things. I think the idea with a standardized test is you could create a blank slate for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of students that want to enter university, right? But then a lot of universities basically said, you know what? Let's waive the SAT and the ACT. And the reason why they're doing that is because they don't believe in this idea of standardization associated with qualifying intelligence. So that tells me something in and of itself.
Right. I think we both agree there, but I'm looking at the other end of the education, the product. So these students are going to go through some sort of a process, and no matter whether or not they decide to go into whatever career, they're basically going to be successful based on their ability to socially communicate socially, and be creative and imaginative and deal with problem solve. Is that going to happen through AI guiding them through their 4 years of college experience? Can it happen with a human educator who has a class of 30 students, each of whom are different, who he has to understand neuropsychologically in order to optimize their potential? And at the end of the day, is this correct from the point of view of evolution and the human race as a whole, where one of the main reasons we're here is because half of the things we do and half of the people who are here fail?
So let me try to explain, Martin, what I'm doing. Once again, I have an association with a variety of different educators out there that represent all the top schools in the U.S. and some in Europe, from in an MBA perspective, a general management perspective, that we're all dealing with this as well. We deal with project-based and experiential learning, which I mentioned before. So I think there's two things. One is elevating education, and I'm not just talking about at a university setting. I'm thinking all the way down to K to 12, right? Things that need to be put in place, like digital citizenship, cyber hygiene, right? That resonate with those sorts of folks to understand this next generation, which is Gen Alpha, born in 2010 and later, that we have to understand as well. The idea of critical thinking is important. Critical thinking, system thinking, those sorts of things, asking those questions around why this is occurring to try to draw and solicit the problem, the issue, what might be a right recommendation. And more of that is being infused into the teaching. I think we're at this, as I mentioned, this inflection in higher education, the university-based setting, where, you have maybe a tenured professor that's teaching students on what they did for their PhD thesis 30 years ago. That's gone, right? So this mechanism of applied project-based thinking that spurs critical thinking, all those sorts of things that we know are important in this workforce to make sure they're ready. So talking about the soft skills that you mentioned, adaptability, resiliency, agility, flexibility, all those sorts of things that are important to understand and assess, but infusing that into the curriculum. I also think AI, and once again, the debate on AI is long and wide. Whether or not it's going to replace me as a professor in the next 10 years, I have no idea.
I hope not.
I have an exit plan already set up. So all right. But I think AI can assist tremendously. Here's where I'm thinking, and I'm
Yeah, I'd
sure.
like to hear that. And
So
how can it assist by you? How can it improve this?
imagine. So you know this probably better than most. This idea of reasoning and reflection, effective thinking, reflecting back on what occurred to address it. It's one of the reasons why, the military does after action reviews, right? What happened, right? How can we design very quick experiments to assess and understand these sorts of things in terms of innovating around the model? That might be sort of the mental model that we have, the shared mental model. And I think allowing that and incorporating that in education is critical. AI can help with this. AI can almost act, if you will, as a TA, a teaching assistant, right? They might also act as a tutor, right? To sort of ask the right sort of leading questions to draw out and solicit a response from students in terms of what did they learn? How would they change the sort of their mode of thinking the next time? What might they iterate, right, associated with inputs that they might need around moving forward with an implementation? What are the risks that are inherent within the system? So a lot of the same things that I might do associated with individual attention to all the students, now AI could help out with associate. So it's a teaching augmentation tool, an assist tool, as opposed to a replacement mechanism.
That's a very interesting statement, based on my naive understanding that AI is essentially programmed to program itself without any real understanding of which way it's going. And it sounds to me like you're assuming that AI is going to be more humanistic, and it's going to work as an ideal teacher's aide, or maybe a substitute teacher or a helper. Is anything
So,
like that really happening? Can anything like that
yes,
really happen?
absolutely. A lot of universities are I just read a couple dozen different AI implementation proposals across CMU. There's a variety of different folks, different universities that are incorporating AI into the curriculum as an assist mechanism. I think you got to understand, though, that artificial intelligence in and of itself, especially these new tools with generative AI, are, in large part predicated, associated with the data that's fed to them, associated with the training data. And if we work on understanding and procuring that, and then looking within the algorithm associated with the weightage or associated with iterating, we could create something that's much more proactive, that's much more beneficial, associated with the aspects of learning that we want to instill within the students.
But does AI allow us to do that at all in the first
Yeah.
place?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Since most of the AI basically runs itself, and it's also being sort of dictated or fueled by two or three major companies, two or three major players. So are you talking about maybe somehow harnessing a part of AI and bringing it under a smaller roof and then sort of channeling it more
Right. So
creatively?
these would be either, retrieval augmented generation RAG implementations based on a data source. So would use the fundamental structure, but then modify it to meet sort of what our needs might be associated with that education environment and what the outcomes we'd like to achieve associated with it. And once again, these things become better and better over time, right? Based on how we sort of work on the inputs and sort of modify. It becomes better at learning in and of itself.
If it becomes better at learning, do we automatically become better at learning as well?
Yes. If it's so, a lot of people think about generative AI in education as a replacement mechanism, right? Students utilize it to write case studies, to develop code, those sorts of things. And that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. I think by incorporating AI into the educational process so that it becomes more of a sort of like, if you will, kind of like a large company utilizing a chatbot to understand your preference patterns better, right? And providing recommendations to you around, what matches with what product you might be looking at, those sorts of things. Now it's the same thing, right? So the tutoring mechanism behind the AI could recommend a variety of different tutorials, mechanisms associated with thinking about the problem, which is not sort of answering the question, but guiding them through a logical sequence of deductive reasoning to identify and address sort of how to solve the problem set, the issue, think about things in a different way, those sorts of things, much like my TAs might do, but now it's personalized for that individual learner.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how far this gets, and if it happens, and if it has practical repercussions. I, as a neurologist slash neurophilosopher, have grave concerns about AI, and I don't think I'm alone. And they basically stem from the Fermi paradox, which you probably are aware of. And for those who aren't, it's basically, in a simple sentence, the more we transfer our intellectual and reproductive capabilities to technology, the more we become potentially either, if not slaves, then dependent on technology, so that when somebody pulls the plug, everything basically drops. I'll certainly agree.
Completely dependent on technology.
Yeah, so I'll certainly
Software
agree
runs
that
the world.
we're at the crossroads of our existence, and I, for one, see us moving through that crossroads in a very negative and dangerous direction. And you sound like you're hopeful, certainly far more hopeful than I am. And I certainly hope that I'm dead wrong, because I've been wrong before, and I'd
I'm
love
an
to be wrong.
optimist.
I'd love to be wrong now. But anyway, is there anything you'd like to ask me, or because I've been peppering you with my stance here, and
So I'd love to get your thoughts from a neurobiology and neuroevolution perspective. Are we seeing fundamental differences in neural activity and synaptic sort of level of activity? Are Gen Z and Gen Alpha just wired differently?
they certainly are. And that's why I speak with the perseverance, or with the persuasion that I do, because I see the brains, I see the functional MRI scans, I see the studies, and there are hundreds of them, if not thousands of them now, published in the most respected journals, from JAMA, which is Journal of the American Medical Association, on down. And we're now actually seeing studies that show, for lack of a better word, disruption, if not almost devolutionary tendencies, where brain connections, both in terms of the numbers of synapses and in terms of their strength, and in terms of the whole cable as a whole, and in some cases in terms of the whole highway as a whole, are being disrupted. They're literally falling apart, with water seeping into the connections, cellular connections not being made, and this in a direct proportion to screen time, particularly among children and among young and developing adults. The problem with our youngest generation that's going through schools is that the younger they are, the more the time they're spending on activities which we which I would call basically flat, if not no learning. And these are basically the isolated loops of social media and TikTok addiction, where they're getting constant squirts of dopamine. They're being neglected by their parents, and they're being raised in their own little digital worlds. And in neurology, we have a saying which you've probably heard, which is fire together to wire together. And this is how the brain, which works like a real switchboard with wires and connections, works and expands. And quite simply, you want to make new connections by challenging the brain. If you don't challenge the brain, which learns only by comparing, no new connections are made. So learning for the brain is a process of learning and making mistakes. People who make mistakes while learning should be actually rewarded, because it shows that they're trying to learn. And the smartest brain in the world is the one that's made every single mistake. Yeah. And the young generation isn't being given that opportunity. And as a result, their brains literally look worse. Their electroencephalograms show completely different patterns of electrical activity, and the connections simply aren't there. They simply don't have the motor in the car to drive the car on all of the right roads that the generation before them had. There are true anatomical differences and physiological differences that now we have proven to be the source of these social studies and these intellectual studies and these testing scores that we have. And that's very, very, very alarming. And it all has to do with the digitalization of the young people. I, and not just I, am convinced that what's behind all of these negative trends, even the trend where politics is becoming radically transformed, is a digitalized and global planet. We have a TikTok president. We don't have a thinking president. Donald Trump, I don't mean to get political and insult anybody, but he really is the first true TikTok president who basically starts to generate a machine gun plethora of ideas on an hourly basis, much the way that TikTok and social media were. So the whole planet is being transformed by this immersion into digital thinking, digital technology, and we're seeing it at the neuroanatomic level.
So, and I completely agree with you, Martin, especially about the administration. I mean, Donald Trump started off communicating with the public through Twitter, now communicates via Truth Social, his own social platform, in sound bites that have no context associated with them. So, but I'm curious, if you and I got in a time machine, went back 60 years to the dawn of TV, when people have been having this similar conversations back then, right? Where kids were in front of the TV, as opposed to the radio, listening to a show, right? Socializing. Now is the TV that was a screen in front of them that was feeding them entertainment, right? That was their babysitter in some cases. And people were having this conversation around brain development. Also, during the dawn of sort of the video games, right? So I remember, myself, I had the Coleco and the Atari, and the same conversations were coming out associated with rewiring the brain, rethinking. Now, yes, and I read John Haidt's book, and he's brilliant in terms of what he does. And we're looking at sort of this idea of causality associated with social media. And once again, I'm critical about this space as well. We actually do discussions in my class. One of our favorite discussions with my students is social media eroding our social fabric, right? Around our relationships, citizen engagement, all of those sorts of things, which is just absolutely fascinating because it's from their perspective, right? And they have a very balanced view associated with it. So I'm saying, is this, and once again, I kind of know the answer to my own question. Is this fundamentally different from the conversations that happened back then? And are we just trying to catch up from a societal perspective? Because everything's changing so rapidly.
No, these questions started way, way back when they invented the printing press. And then they invented the radio, and then they invented the book. And I remember, since both you and I grew up in roughly the same period, I remember when TV first came out, and there were people who were sort of glued to the sets, and there were a number of articles talking about kids sitting in front of the TV all day long, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they were doing the same stuff back then in terms of testing and measuring that they're doing today. And there have never been studies proving that people who read books or watch TV suffer from a lowering of fluid intelligence or creative thinking. There have never been studies that have proven that either of these people suffer from a drop in satisfaction, and so on and so forth. And in the last 25 years, mankind has changed. The paradigm of the planet that we live in has changed more than in the last 2,500 years because of two things. Because of this immersion into technology, which is dopamine based. And that's the key difference. All the technology that we're talking about today is in a feedback loop. The TV doesn't talk back to you. It doesn't wait for you to send it something else so that that turns into that and turns back into that. The book is the same thing. And that's the big difference. Yeah, and that's one of the big differences. And the other big difference is that everybody's in it. Everybody's in it. Everybody's immersed in the digital age. You cannot exist in a modern society without a credit card. You can't rent a car. You can't pay for something on a plane. The U.S. dollar bill has an inscription on it, I believe, a legal tender for all bills, public and private. If you wave that at a person in a counter in a car rental agency, they'll say, "I'm sorry, we don't take cash." That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, but nobody does that because it's all digital, and the population of the world has doubled in those last 25 years. And there are fascinating studies that show that when you get to a certain population density that basically is forced into what we call social singularity, bad things begin to happen. And specifically, hierarchies disintegrate, social structure disintegrates, homogenization begins to take place, and you have the emergence of a technological / ant culture, which Yuval Noah Harari and Jonathan Haidt and these other people talk about. And that's why this is very different than what happened in the 60s and 70s when TVs came out and so on and so forth. From my point of view, we're living in a very, very dangerous time.
I guess the question then is, what do we do? Do we, it would be really tough to rip down the infrastructure and rebuild it. I think that would be really fascinating as a thought experiment, what that might look like. And there's some phenomenal folks like the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard on rebooting social media. And I know NYU has a media study group that's actually focused on this area. Regulations is one thing that we didn't talk about. So there's a Digital Services Act, there's a patchwork of privacy legislation across the states. I think bringing in thinkers that represent a variety of different interests, right? So that one is not overshadowing another, right? But educators, neurobiologists and neural evolutionary thinkers need to come together to understand what should we do as a societal perspective around this imminent dangerous state that we have. I think about things from an education perspective, right? Sort of rewiring via education.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, you're the optimist here, obviously. I'm the pessimist. I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the way it's going to get better is that there will be a number of small crises that are going to coalesce into a bigger one. And people are going to literally have to be forced to think the way that we thought 100 years ago. And that is, am I going to be alive tomorrow? And am I going to have my family safe? And not where am I going to go on my next vacation, and how do I fix the flat tire on my third car? But in the meantime, here in Europe, I think we're a little bit ahead in some respects of where we are in the States in terms of EU regulation addressing this. On one end, the Karolinska Institute in Sweden came out last week with a recommendation that all computers be banned in all schools. That's a new recommendation because they did a number of studies showing that digital learning, at least up to 15 or 16, just does not beat conventional learning and reading from paper and being taught by humans. I can send you the link. I know, on the other hand, in the U.S., the state of Florida has put a ban on social media for kids until 16. And I think it's been done in some other states. Ireland is proposing the same. Australia has done the same. And you have an internet publication regarding the internet and political ads, which actually says online anything goes. One of the things I would love to see is a change in the media law where if I can't say something nasty about a politician into the New York Times without getting sued, why can't I sue Meta for carrying negative content, which is far more vulgar and nasty about the same politician? I think that all media providers should fall under the media law. I think that would go a tremendously long way into addressing a whole lot of issues. So maybe asking you, since you have a publication out on that, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, well, so in the U.S., waiving Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act allowed these online digital platforms to thrive.
Right.
And they're rethinking that.
Good.
Right. It's really interesting when you think about all of these new digital platforms when they sort of arrive on the market, right? Think about Uber. Is Uber a transportation company or a technology company, right? They err on the side of being a technology platform because they don't want to adhere to a lot of the regulations of being a transportation provider, even though that's what they provide, right? It's the same thing with fintech. They err more on the side of tech than fin because, well, you know about all the regulations you'd have to adhere to as a financial services provider. So there's mechanisms of skirting around legislation that unfortunately has led to the kind of the predicament that we're in. Meta, does not want to be regulated as a newspaper or an information resource.
Obviously.
Because of the stipulations associated with all the processes around it. That's allowed them to grow, flourish. Meta's at 3 billion users?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But, as I mentioned to all my students, and I say this over and over again till they're like, okay, stop saying this already. Governments are good in intent when it comes to regulations. They're lousy at execution. Right?
Yes, very true.
We're going after Amazon, right, for monopolistic tactics, as well as Facebook.
Sure, and Google, for that matter.
Right.
Yep.
If you might know this, the Sherman Act was in the Clayton Act, which is 1890s legislation to regulate big trusts. Right. This is like, let's grab a piece of legislation that we have on the shelf and let's throw it at a company where it doesn't really apply. I mean, you have to
I know, it's not going to work. I know.
Governments need to be much more adaptive and forward thinking when it comes to this. The fact of the matter that in the U.S., we have different states have their own privacy legislation.
Yes.
Right. And we have the No Fakes Act associated with AI around AI interpretation that has these clauses in it that are going to be subject for legal interpretation forever.
Yes. Yes.
So
that's why I'm the pessimist. And we have
We
the
have this,
TikTok president and his cabinet if we're going to talk about the U.S. And they don't seem to me to be the types of people who are capable of having the discussion that you and I are capable of having. So, but anyway, let's hope I'm right, and let's hope you're right more than I am. And I'd love to be wrong in that sense, but we shall see. So anyway, I'm exhausted. And thank
lots
you
to
so
think
much
about.
for lots to think about. And it's really been an honor meeting you and talking to you. And I hope our paths cross soon in real life, not just in the virtual life. And I'll be very happy to share this with all of my audience as I can. And I hope it'll be of some value to you and yours as well.
I really appreciated, Martin. I really enjoyed your perspective. I enjoyed skimming through your book, and reading about your research. And, if I'm ever in that part of the world, I'll definitely give you a call. Maybe we could go out and grab a beer.
Please do. Prague is a beautiful place, and we do have
I've
good
been there
beer.
many times. I love it. It's a wonderful
Great.
city.
Right. Ari, thanks very much. I will sign off and wish you and yours and everybody all the very best.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.